Welcome back to In Focus, a coronavirus town hall, bringing your questions directly to your representatives in Washington, D.C. And joining the conversation right now are Congressman Larry Bucshon, Trey Hollingsworth, and Greg Pence, who mainly represent different parts of southern Indiana and some parts of western and eastern Indiana as well. And let's get started with this question from Harry in Muncie, which is part of Representative Pence's district. He asks, being in a pandemic for about 6 weeks now, when is Congress going to give another stimulus check to help everyone? Because the first one, while nice, just, quote, put a Band-Aid on things, in Harry's words. Congressman Pence, can Hoosiers count on a second stimulus check in the future?
Well, thanks, Harry. Thanks, Dan, for having me here. You know, I would tell Harry one of the things he can do is get on my website, pence.house.gov, and kind of keep up with where the bills are, where the CARES Act, where the PPP, the PPE, what's going on out there. I had hoped that we would go back to Washington, D.C. and have a debate and discuss this very topic. But for some reason, the Democrats don't want us to go back. Now, we've got doctors, we have nurses, we have grocery store, C-store workers. Everyone's out there working, but I guess the House of Representatives doesn't have to go back and work and figure these things out.
The House physician this week citing some health concerns on that question. Jeffrey in Evansville has a question as well. He believes essential workers should get hazard pay, saying, quote, "We are daily putting our lives at risk with no protections." Congressman Bucshon, how do you respond to his concerns, and do you support hazard pay for all essential workers?
Well, first of all, I think many of your viewers know I was a healthcare provider before I was a physician and surgeon, and I'd like to thank all the healthcare providers out there who are doing what you said, risking their lives every day to take care of our fellow citizens. They should be applauded. I do think that we should have that debate. I think that citizens that are in the healthcare field, that are working every day, taking care of people, putting themselves at risk. I know one person in my district who has rented an apartment and doesn't go home because he's an ER physician and is afraid to spread coronavirus to his children and his family. So, yeah, I think this should be a consideration, and I think we need to get back to Washington, D.C. and have that debate on behalf of the people that we represent.
Congressman Hollingsworth, you faced some controversy recently over your remarks on the economic concerns versus the health concerns. We talked about that recently on In Focus, but we're also talking about these protests. There's another protest scheduled tomorrow at the State House with protesters who want the economy opened up, and a pretty intense protest today in Michigan as well. I want to ask you, do you agree with Governor Holcomb when he says these protests, because people are closely gathered and some not in masks, that these protests aren't helping the situation when it comes to social distancing and the guidelines that are in place?
I want every Hoosier to be safe. I want everybody that is out protesting to ensure that they are socially distant, to ensure that they're wearing masks. But ultimately, the reason they're protesting is because of the unprecedented restriction on their freedom, the unprecedented restriction on their ability to earn income for their families, the unprecedented restriction on their religious freedoms. And Hoosiers all the way across the district, all the way across the state are starting to say, I want to get back to work. I want to educate my kids. I want to go back to church. I can do those things safely. I will find a way to do those things safely, but they expect to get back to their way of life as quickly as possible, provided that we take all the safety precautions along the way.
This is In Focus with Dan Spieler.
Good morning, I'm Dan Spieler. The conversation continues in Indiana, D.C., and nationwide. Amidst this coronavirus crisis and in the middle of an election year, the topic of equality, policing, and race remains at the forefront. And this week I spoke with both of Indiana's Republican senators. This has been quite a time in the life of our country. What have you learned from the situation involving George Floyd and the ensuing protests that we've seen?
Well, I've learned that so much of America has a heart, that they love their fellow human beings, that they were horrified as I was horrified when they saw that video of George Floyd. I learned that black, white, Asian, Latino, really so many Americans, a diverse group, is calling for change at the local level with respect to police forces and at the state and federal level so that we can deal with the issue of police interaction with our Black American communities. But also more broadly with other issues. And that's something that I want to play a leadership role in helping to advance these concerns.
Wanted to ask you about the president's tweets. Senator Romney called the president's tweet on the Buffalo protester shocking, but he's been more vocal than most in your party. Are you concerned that if more Republicans don't push back against this kind of messaging, that we'll see more tweets like this from the president? What impact might that have on your party this election year, but also on the efforts to try and unify our country right now?
So let's look at the underlying incident. To me, that was horrific again, where you shove an individual, especially at that age. He very well could have lost his life if he had hit his head wrong. Thank goodness he's recovering. So the underlying event was bad again. The president's reaction to it, there were many of us that probably thought that wasn't the place to tweet.
Everyone there in Washington hoping that he recovers quickly. Trevor Shirley reporting there in Washington. Trevor, thanks. I also spoke this week with two Indiana lawmakers, Congressman Jim Banks and Congressman Larry Bucshon, who's also a doctor.
Well, first of all, my thoughts and prayers are with the president and the first lady, and honestly with all citizens of the United States who have been stricken with COVID-19, as well as their families. You know, we've lost over 200,000 of our fellow citizens. So, you know, my thoughts and prayers are with the president and with the first lady and anyone who has been afflicted with COVID-19.
Do you think this will serve as a lesson either for those in Washington or just generally for people around the country who maybe haven't been taking this seriously, who maybe haven't been wearing a mask out in public? Should this serve as a lesson? You're also a doctor. What are your thoughts in terms of the broader significance of what this might mean in the fight against coronavirus?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question. I think that it shows that the COVID-19 virus is very contagious. You know, the president is in an environment where everyone around him is tested, except when he's, you know, out in the public. And even when he's been at public events, he's been distanced from citizens at rallies and things like that. But yeah, there are some people who don't take this very seriously. And let me just tell you, as a physician, this is serious. We've had over 200,000 deaths, people with very serious illnesses. Some people may have chronic conditions in their lungs related to this. So, you know, when the president of the United States, in an environment where everyone around him is tested and where everyone, for the most part, is socially distanced, can get it, then it can happen to anyone. I hope that there are people out there who weren't taking it seriously now that will look at this and take this for what it is. It's a worldwide pandemic, and it's a dangerous virus that needs to be taken seriously.
All right, let's turn now to the race for Congress. We're closely watching that race in the 5th District, which covers the north side of Indianapolis, Hamilton County, and beyond. Recently, I sat down with Republican candidate Victoria Spartz and Democratic candidate Christina Hale.
Well, let me tell you, when I became state senator, I always understood that I represent 100% of the people, and I spend my time to meeting with all sides on all of the aisles and all of the opinions from each side of the issue. And I wasn't a senator who's hiding from constituents, and even on some controversial issues, I would always do it. It's important. You don't represent the party, you don't represent the government, you represent the people, and you have to represent all people.
I think most issues are human issues, not necessarily Republican or Democratic, and I'm going to approach it like I did in the Indiana General Assembly, where every single bill I ever passed, I passed with Republican partners. And I'm grateful to all the Republicans that helped me do that and helped me sometimes make a bad bill better. But I find that when you develop personal and professional trust across the aisle, you can really get good things done.
How would you work to find middle ground? Would you have voted for this most recent relief package in the House? Might you be willing to support the kind of relief package that Senate Republicans are looking at passing next week?
Oh, we absolutely need relief, and we need it now. I've been meeting, for example, with people from the hospitality and restaurant industry right here in the district, and they're scared. You know, by many measures, we might lose 75 to 85% of our independent restaurants, and That's a disaster on a number of levels. People need aid now, and I intend to join the Problem Solvers Caucus in Washington when I serve in Congress. And that's a caucus made up of an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. They've been in the middle, and they've been driving really hard for a solutions-based package, and that's exactly what I think we need to be doing. We're going to have an eviction tsunami fairly soon. We've got cold weather coming, and you even mentioned it in your program earlier, that we've got COVID spiking right here in Indiana.
Would you have voted for the most recent relief package approved by the House? How will we find middle ground here?
Well, unfortunately, we have so much politics in Washington, D.C., not too much policy making, so we have a lot of drama. And unfortunately, there are some good proposals that President done, the House done, and the House minority proposing, but it's just become a meta political battle. Well, they have their own rules and they try to encourage, so and I think there is debates and discussions, and they have their own advisors, and I think they try to, they were given a lot of communications to other states and, and to governors. They're working very closely, and governments had to decide because each states are different.
Been clear?
That message was very clear to our state government, and, our governor worked closely, and we won these conference calls, and our governor decided that it was good for Indiana. Some other governors decided differently, but, one size never fits all.
Let's listen to this question here from a young voter in Carmel.
My name's Eli Kurlander, and I'm from Carmel, Indiana. So the science unequivocally says that climate change is occurring and that humans are exacerbating the problem. So if elected to Congress, what will you do to help combat climate change and protect the environment?
Climate change. What's the solution?
Well, I'll tell you, Indiana has some of the worst air quality of any state in the nation. And I just want to remind viewers, too, energy production was an economic advantage for Indiana for years. Why? We had cheap coal. We're a cheap coal burning state, and that's contributed to some of our problems here with air quality. But that energy production infrastructure is aging, and we're going to necessarily have to replace it or expensively retrofit it. And now's the time to diversify our energy production portfolio. There's tremendous opportunity for Indiana to get out ahead and claim some of these clean energy jobs. They're high paying, and really get to work to bring these win-wins back to Indiana.
We need to make sure that these policies make sense, not just have a lot of demagoguery and destroy industry. Make sure that we can deliver, because I think innovation in manufacturing, innovation in agriculture can bring potentially enormous benefits for the environment.
Do you believe climate change is a significant issue?
Well, I think, we have some changes in the climate happen through history. It's irrelevant how it's contributed, is it human or not human. This debate will decide science to debate. But we have to have strong and good environmental policy, because we want to have clean water for our kids. We want our kids to breathe clean air. Every Republican or Democrat, it's a relevant issue, but let's just have a policy that actually contribute, not some policies that make a lot of billionaires making money, but in the end, they do nothing for the environment.
Beth from Carmel wants to know about reproductive rights. She asks, what do you propose and support in those areas?
Well, quite frankly, Dan, I was a very young mother, and I will never forget that moment when I took a home pregnancy test and it came back positive, and I knew my life was forever changed, and I didn't know what to do. I was 19 years old. But I'll tell you, I'm very grateful that there was no politician in the doctor's office with me. And I believe we should trust women with their own health care decisions and not politicize them.
Would you support Roe versus Wade being overturned if it came to that?
Well, this is going to decide in the courts. That is just something, and that is a decision that's going to be decided in the courts. And I think, Judge Barrett was actually very good at really not implying her personal opinions, because she is a scholar. I was impressed actually with her testimony. She's a scholar who believes, she's a regionalist who believes in the Constitution and rights, and she will look through all of the precedents, all of the things that need to be looked at.
Do you agree with some members of your party who want to see structural changes to how the Supreme Court is, at least in terms of the confirmation process or in terms of how many justices actually sit on the court?
We haven't changed the number of justices since the late 1800s, and I think that kind of conversation is extremely premature. We need to focus on the here and now.
an idea of packing cores because somebody doesn't like the process, I think it's a very radical idea.